For some reason, Amy Scheller is on the spotlight on my screen, and I'm gonna spotlight myself. Okay. Can everyone see me? Okay, cool. Hello, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. If you have technical questions, ask Bob Bellarn. He is on the leadership committee of By Request, which I'm also on, and I'm using By Request Zoom account to run this Zoom. Thank you very much, By Request. Okay. Welcome to this book party. Thank you all so much for being here. And yes, thank you for loving my purple shirt. It actually has the By logo on there, but it's cut off a little so you can see my face. I'm so excited you're here. I'm so excited to share this book. I've been working on it for like 3 years, and well, for 2 of those years, I didn't know it was a book. But I've actually been writing it for a year, and I'm very excited for it to get out there. I'm going to throw a big thing in the chat right now that has a bunch of links, so it's there and you have them. And you can see what all those things are. You can buy the book, you can go to my website. If you're in New York, you can come to the launch party and other things. So I'm going to talk about the book for about 20 minutes now, and then we'll do some Q&A stuff. Let me move my screen. Okay, here we go. So my name is Robert Brooks Cohen. Hello. I know many of you. I saw many of you in there, and we're very close. Some of you I don't know. And so I will tell you a little about myself. I'm a writer and content creator. I live in Los Angeles, but I'm from New York. I identify as bicoastal. Just like being bisexual, it doesn't have to be 50-50 to identify as bicoastal, even if my majority of my time is Los Angeles. New York is still in my heart, and therefore bicoastal. I also, in addition to being a writer, I'm going to begin offering individual coaching sessions and workshops. There's info about that on my website. I'm in training to do that. Undergrad, I was a psychology and film studies major, and then I got an MFA in dramatic writing. And I mention that because those interests that I had are all sort of how this particular book came about, because in many ways it is a psychology study, and it's not a strictly scientific study, but it came from my interest in people and why they are the way they are, and I conducted it somewhat scientifically, not completely. But I also am a writer, and I tried to make these stories dramatic and engaging and edited them. It's all the words of the interviewees, but it's edited with my writing style. And so that blend of interests helped me write this book. I spent 7 years writing a Law and Order SVU. I'm still working on TV stuff and developing film projects with more queer themes lately. And I have now spent almost 5 years hosting and producing the 2 Bi Guys podcast. I'm sure many of you have listened to it, and that's why you're here. That led to this book. I'm also on the leadership committee of By Request, the largest bi group in New York City. I'm an active member of multiple LA, bi, and poly organizations. Okay, that's me. This is the book. And I want to talk for a minute about why I decided to focus on bisexual men who are married to women. It doesn't say that on the cover, it says it on the back, but it's about bi men who are married to women. And I don't think that that's a more important group than anyone else. And I think we need more visibility for other groups too. But I chose this as a starting point. And I hope to do more with bi men married to men, bi women, bi trans and non-binary people, people who are married to trans and non-binary people. But bi men married to women is where I saw the biggest discrepancy between the number of people in this category and the amount of stories and resources and awareness that we have of this. We have very little, and yet I think it's one of the largest groups in the queer community. And it may be an even larger group outside the queer community, because many people don't yet identify as queer, even if they're in this group. And if you've listened to my podcast, some of this may be repeated, but bear with me. Some of this you've probably heard 1,000 times. But for those who don't know, 57% of the LGBT community identifies as bisexual. I think sometimes that's a shock to hear that over half of LGBT people are bi, because we hear a lot about lesbian and gay. But actually they're the minority and bi is the vast majority. The reason you don't often hear about it is that 88% of bi people end up with a partner of a different gender. So their relationship is what we call straight passing. You wouldn't know that they're not straight unless you talked to them and asked, or they told you. At the same time, 88% of bi men are not out. And I hope that statistic is changing. It's about a 5-year-old statistic, but it's still way up there. Bi women are slightly more out, but still not as out as gay and lesbian people, who over 75% of gay and lesbian people are out. Only 12% of bi men are out. And I began to notice doing this work that those statistics overlap for a reason, that many of them are not out because they're married to women. And for various reasons explored in the book, their bisexuality may not seem important, or they may have reasons within the relationship to hide it. There's many reasons, but it's overlapping. And so I think this is a huge, huge group. I think it's actually bigger than what the statistics say, because I think there's a lot of straight identified people who are not yet thinking about it this way. But most are closeted. There are barely any stories or resources. The bi community receives less than 1% of funding directed toward LGBT charities, despite being 57% of the community. And there are unique things that the bi community needs that aren't covered by general queer funding. And so while there's still discrepancy for all bi people in terms of representation, this was the biggest gap. And this book is an attempt to narrow that gap and start here. It's a starting point, but more is needed. So that's reason number one. I forget if I said there were 3 reasons, but there are 3 reasons. Reason number 2 is I chose this group because it was a direct response to my podcast and noticing what was resonating with people. I started the podcast with my friend Alex. I had identified, if you've listened to it, you know this. If you haven't, I had identified as straight until around age 30. He had identified as gay. We met at Bi Request, this bi discussion group in New York, immediately clicked. We started this podcast soon after. We shared our stories. We interviewed people. Alex then got a job at the Trevor Project, where he still is. He still pops in from time to time. It's great. But I've continued the podcast myself. I interview someone each episode, authors, activists, artists, influencers, researchers, politicians, athletes, and of course, by porn stars, my favorite episodes, some of them. But over time, what I noticed was that every episode that deals with the subject of bi married men has like double the downloads of the episodes around it. And every time it came up as a topic within an interview, I would get lots of messages talking about that, thanking us for talking about that. Our season 1 finale focused on that. We got more messages than ever before in season 1, and it helped the podcast get traction. And to this day, most of the messages I receive are from bi men married to women. So I just realized that this is a huge portion of my audience. They were hungry for these stories and resources, and they wanted to share their stories and hear from others and build community. So it was direct response to the podcast. Reason number 3, it's been a personal focus. I was not married when I started this project in 2020, but it was definitely on my mind. I ended up getting married in May of 2021, right in the middle of working all this. And I've realized throughout that I needed to hear these stories as much as I wanted to share them. When I reached out to the first batch of people, I had no idea it would be a book. I didn't know what it was. I just wanted to talk to them. And so it was personal for me too. And I'm so glad it's led to this, but it was about, in some sense, I knew there was a need, but I also was following my heart and what I needed to hear. I knew that my marriage wouldn't be, quote, traditional, but I didn't know exactly how that would work or how to navigate it. And so many of these stories have helped me on my journey, and I'm excited to share them with you. So what happened was, in the summer of 2020, middle of the pandemic, I was bored and didn't know what to do with myself. My mom who's here has done a lot of oral history work in the past, which inspired me. And um, maybe I talked about it with her probably, and she encouraged me. So I just reached out to people who had reached out to me. I conducted 7 interviews in 2020. And then, like I said, I didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't do anything with it for over a year. Um, I can't fully explain why, but I eventually turned it into a book proposal, found the perfect publisher. Routledge loved it. They have books similar to this, but nothing on this exact topic. And then I conducted 6 more interviews in 2022 to round out the book. Interestingly, when I put out the call in 2020, I got about a dozen responses and interviewed 7 of them. When I put out the same call in 2022, I got over 150 responses of people wanting to be interviewed. Some of you are probably here, and I apologize I couldn't get to everyone. I had to pick 6 only. But it just showed me how many people there are with this experience who want to share their story. So it's an oral history. It's not strictly scientific. I have a psychology background, but I'm a writer and storyteller first. It's not a random sample. I chose what I wanted to hear and what I thought would be interesting in the book, and diverse experiences. So we can't draw overall conclusions. It's a small sample size, but I would now like to share a few anecdotal takeaways that, based on my experience, are fairly representative. So I'm going to do 5 key takeaways, and then we'll get to the Q&A. This is a little slower than my practice. Okay. So the first thing I noticed, and this keeps coming up lately, is that I asked everyone about their childhood growing up, not just about their marriage and sex. And many of the guys I interviewed had non-conforming relationships with masculinity growing up, but also many repressed that for years. And so they just not everyone felt like, quote, a normal boy, or maybe they had feminine interests in addition to masculine ones. Some said they felt like outsiders, or they were othered in some way. And I identified with that very much. Like I have very masculine traits, and certain things fit that box perfectly. Other things did not. And I kind of shied away from those things. And some of those people who felt othered, they connected that to their sexual fluidity at a young age, but others did not. Like me, I did not until much later in life. So they all many of them noticed that, but some connected it, some didn't until later. And some are exploring their gender identity now, only now. And this actually came up in an interview I did just this week, and with one of the guys from the book. And it's interesting how much gender and sexuality are related. Obviously, your sexuality is about what genders you're attracted to, but they're interrelated with your own gender, not in a direct correlation, but there's something there, and each story is a little different and gets into that a little. The second takeaway I had is that coming out is not a binary singular event, especially for bi men coming out to their wives. Like going in, I thought, okay, I'll separate out the guys who were out to their wives before they got married and the ones who came out after, and we'll compare and see what the outcomes were. And what I found was that was impossible. Coming out was not so simple. It was not a one and done, or, you're out or you're not. It was, for many of them, not all, but many, they had to come out multiple times, often over many years, going deeper and deeper each time. And partially, for some of them, it was because they didn't fully understand everything going on when they met their wives or got married. So they may have shared everything they were feeling at the time, but they didn't know everything, and so couldn't necessarily share everything. And some couples kind of evolved together along those lines as they learned more and more. And it just sort of, in some ways, depended on at what point in the journey were they when they got married. But it was coming out is not binary. That's my theme in this book, is that a lot of things are not binary. There's another thing coming up that's not binary. Number 3 takeaway. Coming out was a positive experience for all the men I interviewed, even if it did lead to a marriage ending. Which, yeah, it's interesting. For those who stayed together, coming out was sometimes difficult and caused conflict, but over time it led to a deepening of that relationship and more authenticity. And some of the guys I interviewed, a handful, did end up getting separated or divorced, but none of them regret coming out. They may regret how it happened. They may regret that they're not together, but coming out helped them understand what they really needed and if their current marriage was right for them. And it forced these conversations, and like sort of looking back at when you are married and not out and having thoughts that you can't say. Looking back, nobody would want to go back to that. When you're in that, for me too, it's very hard to imagine what it's like to not live that way. When you look back, it's pretty easy to say, to see how hard it was and to not want to go back there, even if what came next was hard. You can be yourself, and separating, in fact, sometimes led to what I saw as like a deeper emotional connection between those people, maybe as friends, co-parents, partners of some kind, even if not spouses, because there's more authenticity there than before, which leads to more love, even if the container for that love takes a different shape. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Number 4, non-monogamy became a topic of conversation for almost every guy who came out to his wife that I interviewed, but not all of them needed to actually explore non-monogamy. So bisexuality does not equal non-monogamy. It's a common misperception. I'm a polyamorous bisexual who plays into that stereotype, but it's actually, in fact, it's only very slightly correlated. Bi people are only a little bit more likely to be non-monogamous than straight people. Some statistics have it at about 10% more. Some statistics are like 1% difference, statistically meaningless. So the vast majority, about 80% of bi people, will remain monogamous. And the majority of couples I interviewed in the book are monogamous. However, within a marriage that involves bisexuality, I think it is an important conversation to be prepared for, because it does come up. Sometimes the husband does want to open things up. Sometimes the bi person does want to live out their bisexuality in the present in a physical way, and it comes up for that reason. Sometimes the wife or the non-bi partner will make that assumption and ask preemptively and bring it up or be worried about that. And even if that assumption stems from societal biphobia or stereotypes, the conversation, I think, is still real and important. And it actually benefits these couples. I think talking about non-monogamy benefits all couples, straight, monogamous, like the most vanilla, because even if you want to remain monogamous, having that open and vulnerable discussion and the reasons behind it and what it's really about and what you're looking for can deepen the relationship. And it's not a fine line, right? Like, I think a lot of people go into it thinking my partner will never agree to this. We're on opposite sides of this binary, and we can't reach an agreement. But once again, I've learned that monogamy and non-monogamy is not a binary difference. I see it also as another spectrum. There are various levels, and there's a whole chapter in here about non-monogamy that I recommend. But it's a spectrum. There's many different ways to do it. There's many versions of, quote, monogamy that many people do that are not, I would say, are not really fully binary monogamous. And so when you have those conversations, you can find where that boundary is for you. And I would just, my advice to people is like to be open to exploring that. And you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, and you shouldn't be pushed to do that. But maybe there are boundaries that you can find. And many of the people in this book thought they could never talk about these things and then did were more deeply connected and have found sort of like carve outs or where that line is, and it's not, all or nothing. The last takeaway is I want to talk about a few challenges that bi men married to women still face. One is understanding and navigating non-monogamy. That's a big challenge. I just mentioned it. I won't talk about it more. Another is that after coming out and embracing bisexuality, being in a straight passing relationship is a challenge. It's hard. Once you've sort of opened up about this stuff, it can feel hard to sort of be assumed to be straight, and you're almost back in the closet by default when you're in this straight passing marriage. A lot of people I interviewed don't like being seen as a straight couple, but then it's hard to come out. Like, do you say it to every single person you meet? No, probably not. When do you say it? It's a lot of emotional labor to figure that stuff out and figure it out with a partner. And many of the people have tried to find ways to be visibly bi, which is interesting. And then the third challenge is finding community. It can be very difficult, but I also learned from these interviews how important it is. And for me, Bi Request and now my LA bi groups have been so important to me. These groups exist in major cities, and I recommend them. I recommend Bi Request. But outside of major cities, bi community is mostly online, better than nothing. But the in-person, people are really craving the in-person community. And for those who have found it that I interviewed, it's really life-changing. It's so important. It's so validating. I remember how I felt going to Bi Request the first time. I had read books. I had gone down rabbit holes on the internet. I wasn't really that close to coming out. I went to Bi Request once, and I felt finally like I could come out. Did I just freeze? Can you hear me? I just froze on my screen. Okay.
You did freeze. You're active now. You're fine.
Thank you. Okay. I went to Bi Request, and just being in the room physically with people who thought of this as normal and a positive thing in their life, like feeling that energy in the room and from real people, really was the tipping point for me. And if it had just been online, I don't know if I would have gone on this journey, or at least not as quickly as I did. And also another thing from the book is like, people who have found a bi group, it's great, but even having just one bi friend is very helpful for people and validating, because it's so invisible. You feel alone, you feel crazy sometimes, but having one person to validate this stuff and get you without you having to explain or answer questions is really valuable for people. And I think bi men and bi women are also, but especially bi men, are hiding in plain sight, and they're all around us, and we feel very isolated. And so what I hope is that this book, I froze again, but maybe you can hear me. You can hear me. Okay. I hope that this book we can start to build those connections and that visibility, so people can see that they're not alone and that there are people like them. Okay. A few final thoughts, and then we'll get to the Q&A. I'm going much slower than I was. I think these marriages will look different in the future as the next generation learns more about bisexuality growing up. The youngest guy I interviewed for the book is 30. So pretty much everyone grew up before 2000, before bisexuality was as visible or understood. I still think we need more resources, more visibility of this experience, more community. And I see bi married men as sort of a bridge between gay and straight community, because many have lived their lives in straight culture, maybe even currently. And now they're getting into queer culture. And like, I want with this book to invite even straight identified men who are exploring sexual fluidity even a little. I want to invite them into queerness in ways that feel safe to them, so, with this book, so that they can use their unique position as bridge builders, because I think there's a perception among straight people of what the queer community is, and it feels far from what they are. And actually, it's all a spectrum. It's not these things that are far apart. There's all these people in between expressing themselves in so many different ways. It's just that many of these people in the middle are not as visible, and you don't know that they're bi. And so I hope that we can use this unique place on the spectrum to be bridge builders. I grew up viewing sexuality and gender as very binary. For a long time, I was locked into that way of thinking, but I now view it as a spectrum. And I also think, what's the last thing I want to say? I also think that I know there's a lot of bi people here in the audience. There's probably a lot of people here who know me, who don't listen to the podcast and don't identify as queer. And I want to say to you guys too, like, yes, sexuality we've sort of defined as which gender you're attracted to. But writing this book and doing all this work and being out now for a bunch of years, I have noticed that there is like that sex, romance, intimacy, emotional connections, there are hundreds or thousands of factors affecting them, way more than just the gender spectrum. Like we boil this down to like, which gender do you like? But and which gender do you connect with romantically? But there are so many other factors that affect relationships, and everyone has different desires, interests, needs. And I suspect that many people have desires, interests, needs that maybe they're a little ashamed of. Maybe they haven't fully explored or haven't quite reconciled. And my message is that's your superpower, that confronting whatever that thing is, whatever spectrum it's on, gives you the power to confront anything and the ability to get comfortable with your authentic self and to really love yourself. And that's what the guys in this book have done. So it could be on any spectrum. For many of the guys in this book, it's the gender spectrum. And they confronted something with huge societal stigma. And it's difficult to go through it, but it gives you enormous power to understand yourself and live more authentically. And so I hope that they can be an example for everyone, whether you're queer or not, to love every part of yourself and live with authenticity. Because as RuPaul says, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? And so that's really what this book is about. It's about loving yourself so that you can love others and have meaningful relationships. So that is my little talk. Thank you for listening. I'm gonna now, let's do a little Q&A. So there's a bunch of people from the book who are here. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I'm going to ask a few questions, and whoever wants to speak on it, raise your virtual hand if you could, because I can't see everyone on the screen at the moment. I'll try to look around, and I'll ask a few questions. I'll take a few answers for each one and we'll move on, and I'll make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. So the first thing I'll ask is, like, thinking of anything I said, or especially those 5 takeaways I mentioned, are there any that really resonated with you? Would you like to expand on how that showed up in your relationship, or any other takeaways that I didn't mention that you want to share with the group? Yes, in the reactions, there's a raise hand function. Click reactions and then click raise hand like I just did. So I'll repeat them. It's like non-conforming relationships with masculinity, coming out being not a binary singular event, coming out being a positive experience, non-monogamy, or some of the challenges for bi men. Anyone want to share? Austin. Hi, Austin. Wait.
There we go. I'm
There we
unmuted.
go.
Oh, yeah, where to start? I think the coming out process, like I thought I came out before we were married, and it wasn't a coming out. I had just framed it in a way that felt good and was as much as I understood at the moment about who I was. So It was basically about isolated experiences I'd had in the past, and my wife thought they were in the past. And so as I came out to her 10 years into our marriage, and she didn't understand, and it was a crisis at that time. And then I continued to understand more what that meant, and I would come again and talk about it. It was that continual coming out as I was coming out more and more to myself. I think that was the key. Like, like you said, I didn't really understand. And then so about 15 years after I came out to my wife, we actually parted ways. So I'm one of those that we decided to go a separate direction.
How old were you when you first got married?
25, 24, something like that.
Yeah. So very understandable that you didn't have it all figured out.
Yeah, and for me, for both of us, we had a script that we were given of what marriage looked like by our faith background, what relationships looked like, and we tried to stick to that script as much as possible, and we didn't think outside of that sort of binary way of looking at the world.
Yeah, yeah. Can I ask you another question while you're up here, Austin?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you feel about the decision to come out more fully looking back, even knowing that you guys are not together anymore?
So actually at the time I came out more publicly, my wife was instrumental in that. She was like, it's time, don't you think? And then I came out, and she was a big supporter. She actually wrote a blog about being the wife of a bi guy. So she really processed it in a way that was actually quite public. And so I was her editor. So there was a lot of back and forth, and we wrestled with a lot of things privately as well as publicly. But yeah, it was, I don't know, did that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much. Yeah, I mean, right. It's like sometimes we fear these things will end the relationship, and we get the opposite response. But then, that doesn't mean necessarily that everything in the relationship is right.
Right.
Yeah. Anyone else want to talk about any of those takeaways? Or I would also ask for any of the couples or guys from the book, is there something you wish you had realized or understood sooner? Where are you guys? Yay. Okay, Keith and Candace. Go for it.
Yay. I think for me personally, as the straight half, I just wish I would have realized that nothing had to change. In my head, I just had these notions, and I was convinced that it would never be the same, and it wasn't, but in the best ways. And nothing had to change in a bad way, even though all I was finding was proof of the opposite. And I think that's the hardest part, is the invisibility and the not talking about it. All you find are the unhappy people. And so it really just affects how you have the outlook for the future. And it destroys relationships when people come out, because all they think is it's going to be terrible and it's never going to feel better. And they just hang on to that fear. And I just wish I would have realized sooner that I could just listen to him and trust that he was still the person that I loved.
Yeah.
And that openness to listening and like truly understanding what I was saying, as I was saying it, as I was coming to terms with learning my own sexuality and how that would or would not affect my relationship. But that openness to be able to be one another's bouncing boards, or to have those conversations.
Right. Right. Yeah, I love that. And you guys were pretty young too when you got married, right?
Yeah, got together in high school and got married 2011 ish.
2011.
Yeah.
How old we were, but
I don't know.
I mean,
Young
we've
20s.
been together
Yeah.
since high school.
Right. Right. Their chapter in the book is about evolving together, I think is the title of the chapter. And yes, and Candace and Keith also, but Candace has started a whole website and movement about mixed orientation couples. And that's part of why I included her in this book. It's 13 bi men and 2 of their wives. Elizabeth is the other one. She's in this Zoom. But I really wanted to include Candace because I think a lot of times guys are afraid of the reaction that their wife will have. And Candace was very open about like having that reaction a little bit, but then sitting with it and getting into it and talking about it and having a discussion, an evolving discussion over a long period of time, and like putting in that work, and it strengthened their relationship. And what you talked about, I think is so true. Like, people are afraid of change, and I was, when I came out, my whole life's going to change, and the truth is, like, it will change, but it's great change. Like, for me, it's good changes, even if you have to let go of certain expectations. Cool. Anyone else? Elizabeth and Howard, are you there? Do you want to say hi? Not to put you on the spot. And also,
we'll say hello.
Hello.
Oh, sorry. So we'll say hello. We're just having our own debate and dialogue regarding this because we were fortunate enough that we met after the fact, after we were both out. Well, I was more out than he was, and at a gathering for bi people. You'll hear all about it in the book.
I like how you're using a euphemism when it's very explicit in the book.
Right. I wasn't shy. We weren't shy. So that was a really nice thing because we didn't have to worry about that fear, that rejection. It was already on the table, like, okay, that's who we are. Then it was just the relationship, getting to know each other. How do we transition from being just people who enjoy playing to a relationship? And I remember, I'll never forget this question you asked, not for the book, but at a picnic one summer, Rob, where he's like, "Oh, how is it that you're, being a bisexual couple? How is it in your marriage, your relationship, being bisexual? Does that make, bring difficulties?" And I'm like, "No, that's no problem. It's just the relationship part." For us, we've worked that out. Very fortunate because, again, as you mentioned before, one of the takeaways, being very open, being vulnerable, having the discussions, no matter what the repercussions are. If you're open and honest with yourself and your partner, you learn and you grow and you become, as you say, stronger because you're open and honest and you're like, this is what I want. This is what I want out of the relationship or what we can do together. So anyway, that's my thoughts. Any thoughts?
You agree, Howard?
I'm the talker of the group here.
Right. I'm the action person here.
Well, one of my next questions was like, is there anything you're still struggling with? And it sounds like to me, if there is anything, it isn't related to sexuality. It's just maybe related to whatever's going on in your lives otherwise. Is that fair?
It's the dirty dishes, the laundry, all the other little crap that every couple has to deal with, know.
Right. As is portrayed in many of these stories. However, you guys are unique in that, which is why I love that you're in the book too, because you were out just basically by meeting each other and you didn't have to go through that. But yeah, it's like there's a vast spectrum of how hard it is to talk about this stuff. And yeah. Okay, Keith and Candace and then Austin have stuff to say.
I just liked how you brought that up about the thing we've come across with dealing with so many mixed orientation relationship couples, is that the sexuality becomes the scapegoat, when in reality it's very seldom the actual biggest problem. And people break up and they separate, and that becomes the reason it happened, when really things were extremely broken to begin with. And you already had two people or more who weren't communicating well. And it sucks because it becomes the reason when it might not have actually been, but it just puts another negative connotation on someone's sexuality being the destroyer of this mixed orientation relationship.
Yeah, when it was really just really, really poor communication.
Yeah, or life problems or
yeah,
whatever,
yeah, any
but
combination of relationship issues that
yeah, they just hold on to
anyone
that.
in a non-mixed orientation relationship would still have,
Yeah,
and do
Right.
still have.
yeah, yeah.
Right. So many things. And it all, I mean, it's like what I was saying before about the hundreds and thousands of factors of a relationship and a partnership. And yes, this often is scapegoated, but I also think when you've had this tough conversation, like many people in the book and you two have had, like it gets easier to talk about all that other stuff. So it's actually kind of a nice obstacle to, if you can overcome it, to get deeper on other things. Okay. Austin. You're muted, Austin.
There we go. Yeah, one of the things that I found interestingly difficult, right? I mean, so I'm seeing somebody now, and it is not a woman. So that's been really interesting. And every once in a while, I run into something. I'm like, oh, this is supposed to be a hetero problem. And no, it's just a human problem. It's just a human thing to work through in a relationship. And I'm finding that once my wife and I decided, okay, our marriage is not working for us, for the container for our love, how are we going to shift that? There was so much of definition that we had given to marriage and what we were in that once that container was gone, there was this intimacy that we could not have imagined. And we were talking about things that we should have been talking about as a couple all along in really deep ways, and able to just relax into that. And so I'm finding as I get into a new relationship that there's still those patterns that of ways I've been looked at what a couple is or what this is, that I'm realizing I'm writing the rules for how I want that to look for me now. And that's really liberating. I can ask for what I want. It's not just I don't just have a script I need to go by. It's completely me, and that's terrifying and liberating at the same time.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And that's like, I didn't really discuss that today, but it's a huge theme of the book, is like how queerness or non-conformity on a lot of these spectrums, not monogamy, gender, other things, it forces you to write your own script, but it's like an opportunity to write your own script, and it's hard to, you know, abandon the expectations that you have, but there's really something beautiful in writing your own script. And
Yeah. And one thing, when you do that, I think you attract people into your life that are on that similar trajectory. And it's that sort of this queer thread that's now running through my life in ways that I'm like, where did all these people come from?
right.
And it's
Right.
it's been a beautiful thing.
Right. It's a lovely filter. Yeah, exactly. Okay, last question for you guys, then we'll open it up. We'll end in a minute, but is there any advice I mean, you actually, I guess my question is, what do you hope that other people will get out of reading your story in the book? I asked you, most of you, this already on the podcast, but if you've got a brief answer of it, we would love to hear. Go for it, Keith and Candace.
We all know I'm always willing to talk. I mean, I think we said this in possibly the book and maybe the podcast interview. For our case particularly, just so that people don't feel alone. I mean, that's the overarching thing, obviously, for bi folks, but mixed orientation couples also. And I was extremely proud to be a part of it as a straight person's voice. I sometimes joke that I'm begrudgingly straight. Like, I'm like, I don't feel like I am. I feel like a huge ally. I feel like I want to be a voice for people. And sometimes, you know, I don't want to speak for people, but I just want to be representative of, you know, how welcoming and not alone anybody is, and just a positive example in some small way.
And and that all stems from, that's what we were looking for.
Yes.
And we didn't have those examples.
Yeah.
To draw a healthy, sustainable relationship, with the cards that we had. So we just want to be that,
Yes.
that for
Right.
other people.
Right. Beautiful. And, you know, my whole podcast and this book is really like the resource I wish I had, the examples I wanted to see and didn't have. And so, yeah, it's like we wish we had heard these stories. And so you're paying it forward. So thank you.
So we're telling them,
Yeah,
those stories.
you're telling
for
them.
that
Yeah.
purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Austin.
Yeah, I think for me, it has to do with mental health and men that are in situations that they don't feel that there's no way out. And I know a lot of men who've dealt with depression and really have been closeted. And for me, a big part of my coming out was as much that as anything. I had a friend who took his own life, and so for me, that was like a no-brainer. I wanted to at least let people see somebody living their life in a way that was authentic and without apology, accepting their desires. And so, and for me, especially within the faith tradition I come from, people have reached out to me, said, have had ongoing conversations, and they're still closeted. They're still in a mixed orientation marriage, and in a situation that I don't know if I could even live in, but I can at least offer support and just the fact that somebody sees them. And yeah, that's what I needed, and I didn't have for many years or decades.
Yeah. Right. So beautiful and important. And there's a reason this is in the Rutledge mental health section, and Austin's story touches on more of that stuff, and it's really beautiful. I love that chapter. I love all the chapters of everyone who's here. Howard and Elizabeth, what do you hope people will get out of reading your story?
For me personally, it's just the fact that being a woman, not the fact that I'm bi, that at this point, that's kind of irregardless, but I have a better understanding of Howard. But at the same time, there's a lot of women out there who support and enjoy and want to be with bi men. Because I've heard over the years so many bi men who are like, oh, I hear women, they don't want to be with me, blah, blah, blah. I say they're lost. You know, there's so many women out there who, you know, enjoy bi men, you know, just don't see it as an issue, don't have the fear, don't reject them and stuff. So I think that was just my biggest takeaway, is that we're here to support and help in any way. And
I love it.
And part of my chapter too.
Yes. Tell us more about what you love about bi men.
We'll do that
on Saturday. We'll do that on Saturday. But it is, there's a lot of stigma, especially from straight women, but lots of women. And so it is really lovely when we get to hear about women who prefer bi men, or the positive things about dating and being with bi men. Howard, would you like to answer what you hope people will get out of reading your story? You don't have to.
Maybe more dates? No, I'm kidding.
I promise that Howard spoke in this book, and his words are in this book. I got him to talk, and there's a lot of words in this book that came out of Howard's mouth.
Well, if you listen to the podcast, you'll know he does speak. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah, they were on the podcast last year or something, and their chapter is also hilarious. I mean, it's serious too, but it is one of the few chapters that is also genuinely hilarious. I laugh when I reread it. Okay, so just a couple minutes left, and but does anyone have questions for me or the panelists? Also, Dr. Mimi, I don't want to put you on the spot, no pressure, but if you had a comment or any observation, since I know you do work in this area, but also anyone else who has a question for me, or wait, let me spotlight myself. Okay, my mother has a question. Go ahead, Mom.
I always have a question. Well, first, thank you, Rob, again for writing this and sharing these stories. And I just want to thank all of you bisexual men and their spouses for sharing the stories. We lost. Did we lose it? Oh,
No, you're good.
There. And my question, you sort of have touched on, but my question is for all those who shared their oral histories. How did it feel first to tell your story, and to Rob, and how did it feel, to have someone listen to your story in that context of working with Rob?
Anyone want to answer my mother's question? Okay, go ahead, Keith and Candace.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, initially, very threatening. Even being openly out to friends and family at that point, going that extra step in having an open conversation with a stranger that's going to end up expansively going out to other strangers to have that same conversation. Initially, it was very scary and threatening in a way, but once the conversation started happening, various stories that we had heard on Two Bi Guys, it was kind of exciting just to like have that connection and be able to have that conversation in a very open, honest way. We're so grateful for having Rob having an ear to listen to our story.
Yeah, I think I was the one who, I'm pretty positive actually, I was the one who reached out and volunteered us for for the interview way back in 2020. And I kind of did it on impulse. I had our mixed orientation groups and all that. I was very active online, but in a lot more of an anonymous way. And so I reacted, I reached out to you, and then I regretted it. And I was like, oh, hell, but, I didn't know at any time if it would be anonymous or visible. But then the more we talked about it and thought about it, we didn't really care either way. And I don't know why we were bothered. I don't even know. I think for me, we touch on that a little bit in a few places, but I go back to those old worries and those old fears of like, people are going to think I'm his beard. They're going to think he's actually gay. And I get so upset that I still think that way after all this time and all of my own work. It's just that stupid fear that's like, people aren't going to take us seriously or respect our relationship. I don't even know. But there was definitely that fear of being in the open and front and center. That is gone now. But yeah, I was afraid at first, but then very happy to be telling our story and have people to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you did it and that it worked out and it reminds me of I came out publicly because by request, like a few of us were featured on a TV show called Slut Ever. We recorded it. It wasn't going to be released for 6 months, but I had said yes to it. And I was like, oh God, what have I done now? Like, we recorded this. That was impulsive. And now in 6 months, it's going to be on TV. And so
no takebacks.
Right. No takebacks. I signed a waiver.
Being recorded.
And so, I sorry, someone's not muted. I then had those 6 months to think about it and come out to people and make sure I was there. And in hindsight, I'm glad I pushed myself to do that, because yeah, it things changed, and it was great. Okay, Austin, go ahead, Austin.
Louder.
Wait, what was that? Oh.
So I don't know.
So, well, that distracted me. What was the exact question?
I think my mom, you can answer that.
Yes. No, I got it.
What was it like to be interviewed by me?
Yeah, no, it was like therapy. To be honest, I hadn't talked with somebody that was out as bi before. And so for me to have a conversation with someone who just, I didn't have to explain myself, was so freeing. And that was my experience. I had already been out. I didn't know any other bi people, but I knew what I was, and had been out for a little while. So that was that.
Cool. Yeah, I was also talking to someone else. The interview will come out soon. Another guy from the book who lives in London. He was going to try to make it, but it's too late. But he said that I asked him open-ended questions, but I thought of things to ask him that he had never thought to think about. And because I've gone through the experience, or at least some of it, I didn't know what he would say, but I knew things to ask about. And I didn't really realize that at the time, but I was just asking what I was curious about. But I will be doing coaching soon, which is like therapy, and which apparently I was already doing 3 years ago without realizing it. Okay, Howard and Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, we fortunately had a different experience because we've known Rob since the beginning. I think you actually came to the bi request the first meeting that we were leading, right? Howard and I, maybe.
I don't remember. I actually, I think it was Paul, and it was about
Oh,
Kevin
maybe Paul.
Spacey.
Oh, okay. So anyway, but
Anyway.
I've known Rob for years, and so it was just like having a fun conversation, and we just joked and laughed, and oh my God, I think there's so much that hit the editing floor that we were just giggling about, but especially me. But it was just like having a conversation by request. We're very open and just being ourselves and sharing. And I've been very fortunate that we have the community in New York. And before the pandemic, there'd be times that twice a month we would have 30, 40 people in a room talking about themselves. It was amazing. Now we're maybe about 10 or 15. I mean, I'm not trying to, but just finding a way to find the community and being able to be honest and talk with each other and have that opportunity and share your stories, even though they may not be exactly the same. There's so many parallels that you could really understand. You're like, oh yeah, I've been there. I've been down that road. Oh yeah.
Right.
And I want to say I feel really bad for bi men in our society. It's a double-edged sword. I say it all the time. Being a bi woman, I'm looked at as like, ooh, fantasy, ooh, lovely threesome, and I'm the opposite. I'm like, yeah, I want a threesome too. I want an MMF. So where a lot of, which really throws people off, they're like, what? No, because they want it, they're used to FFM. But anyway, so it's one of those things where I like to subtly kind of push back and change things. And well, actually, I'm not that subtle in my chapter. I wasn't that subtle, but anyway, there's ways of just saying that you're out there and supporting. And I think I kind of digressed. I went off the topic, but anyway, no, it was wonderful. And I'm so glad that you've given all these voices and different perspectives the opportunity to share their stories and given voices to people who aren't as fortunate as we are having bi request in New York. So anyway, on that note, I will shush.
Right. Well, and that's why I'm so glad you guys are in the book. You know, your interview was sort of the polar opposite of some of the other ones I did with people I had never met. But I wanted to have a diversity of experiences in the book, and a, you know, diversity of tone and style. And we talked about different types of things in your interview that are, you know, will be interesting and valuable in different ways. And I remember those days of by request, like I would always volunteer to sit on the floor because there were never enough chairs. And yeah, I hope we get back there soon, and I hope it spreads to other places. Keith and Candace, go for it.
Oh, I just had a super quick when she was saying, you know, she feels bad for bi men, basically, just a small little anecdote, even in my own personal Facebook pages and things, I'm extremely open about, you know, being supportive and mixed orientation relationships and bisexuality. I am always assumed to be the bisexual one. Always. Every single time someone talks to me about it, I get comments, they just, even his family to this day, just think I'm the bi one, no matter how many times I've corrected them, no matter how many times we're open about it. It's just assumed that the woman is the bi one. And it's just, it's, I just can't even believe it sometimes. It's like, come on, how much more open can I be about it? It's so crazy.
Yeah. Austin, go for it.
Yeah, sometimes I do a lot of work with men in general in men's groups, and I just go into those groups. It used to be I used to have all this internalized homophobia going to these groups, or biphobia, and now I walk in there as if every man is a bi man, and interact with them in that kind of way. And often it's surprising how much there is a hunger for intimacy even among straight men, whether they're bi or not. To sexualize that connection that all men need is unfortunate, and so that's a gift that I bring into those spaces that I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a huge area of need. Cool. Eli, you want to say something? Go for it.
I was not gonna speak, but Austin and Keith and Candace and Howard and Elizabeth, I think you guys have done a really good job at shaping this conversation in a positive and productive and helpful way. And Rob, I can't wait to read this book. I am a heterosexual man who was in a marriage with a bisexual woman who came out in her mid-30s. And it was I think we touched on the subject. It was a difficult conversation, maybe for about 10 seconds, until we sort of realized that it's not that big of an issue between us, and we have much bigger issues that sort of that took precedence. And I think one of them was, Austin, you touched on men and, you know, gender roles and expected masculinity. Rob, that was one of your takeaways, was sort of like the sort of masculinity expectations, and I guess you know, intimacy that Austin mentioned. If that's missing in the context of a relationship, whether there's bisexuality or different things involved, that's part of the work that needs to get done. And I remember, Rob, I had a conversation with you that was like, I don't think I'm very happy. And it doesn't have to do with, you know, my wife coming out. It has to do with other issues. And you mentioned the word authenticity, which has been mentioned here a couple of times tonight, and having difficult conversations without fear of what might happen, even if what might happen will change things drastically. Because sometimes things need to change drastically. And in the end, it can be for the better. And I can sit here absolutely attesting that it's for the better, and I feel stronger, and I feel more able to show emotion and share emotions in positive and you know, helpful, respectful ways. So cheers, kudos, can't wait to read the book, can't wait to read the follow-up by women in marriages, and then so on and so forth.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Eli. That's really beautiful. And yeah, you can be in the next book. Cool. Well, so we've gone a little over. I don't want to go too long. I want to end the recording in a moment, but I will stay on a little longer and chat or answer a few more questions. But I just want to, okay, I want to repost the links in the chat just in case anyone needs them before they go and don't want to scroll up. Thank you all so much for coming. Okay, don't stay, don't go. Glow wants to say something.
Okay. I always
My
have to
aunt.
figure out how to unmute. What I'd like to say is, it's kind of a question for you, Rob.
Sure.
What are the kinds of things that plain straight people can do to make the lives of people who are in different modes of living easier? For myself, I don't really care that much about somebody's sexuality. I have a bunch of gay male friends. We're going to the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington holiday concert at the end of this week. And I don't really think of these men as gay. I think of them as my friends. I like them because of the people that they are, regardless of anything else. Part of that's because I'm old. When you're 75, I guess you don't really focus that much on, flirting or romanticizing or sexualizing contacts with people. So that may be part of it. But to a great extent, I think the only reason there's stigma about things like bisexual anybody is that the non-bisexual people are assumed to have negative reactions, which I think, unfortunately, is, for the most part, relatively accurate. So my feeling is, what can straight people do to help other straight people understand that this is anybody's own personal choice, and don't get twisted up in knots about it?
Well, good question. And thank you for sharing. I mean, there's a lot in that question. Like, and I don't know that I fully have an answer. Like, one thing most straight people could do is be more like you, be more accepting and understanding. And so if you can, get that message out there, great.
Yeah.
In terms of dealing with like real homophobes, that, I don't know, like it's difficult, and that's a whole other discussion. But I do think,
True.
one thing is read this book and make people read this book, because, and I, I'm being facetious, but in reality, it isn't just about explaining terms and explaining why the law should be what it is, and arguing about these things and negotiating. A big thing that we need is like representation of what people's lives really are like, and how does bisexuality play out in someone's life? Like, why is it important? So when you say like, I don't care about someone's sexuality, it's like, people think that bisexuality comes up in other people's lives in certain ways, and it's often not how it comes up, or not the things that people actually struggle with. And so I do think one of the important things is to get to know more bi people and be open with them, so that they may feel comfortable coming out. And the more that you know what their lives are really like, then the more understanding and empathetic you can be to the real challenges that people face. Bob, do you want to say something?
Yes, I want to add something to that that is very important. And I'm a facilitator here for By Request, and we've come up with this before regarding about with couples, and that we all collectively need to learn not to assume that a guy and a woman together, when they're together or holding hands, that they're straight, or that two guys holding their hands together, that they're gay, or two women that are holding their hands that are lesbian. In all of them, they can be bi in any of those combinations. And so one thing to think of is to get this, what's called cis hetero thought process out of us, and just simply say, oh, they're a couple, or their friends, and take that out of it. So that way there's no, stereotyping. And we all have to learn it collectively. And that helps regarding with language. Language helps explain all of us and our experiences. And it really is important to have it.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. Thank you, Bob. And I was going to say something, but I forgot. And so Brad and Amy, do you want to say something before, in case I think of it? You're muted though. Here, wait, can I unmute you? No, I don't know how.
Okay,
There we
sorry.
go.
I just want to thank you for making the world a better, smarter place.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that.
All
yeah.
of you,
Yeah.
but you in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody who shared their stories for the book. And today, what was I going to say about something? I don't know, whatever. I said a lot of things. Oh, I was going to say, sorry, Bob made me think. This is the last thing, and then we'll pause. But I think that bisexuality, like something that's coming up from what a lot of people are saying is like, why is your bisexuality important? And a lot of, I think, non-bi people think, well, it's about choosing a partner and which gender partner are you going to have, and are you going to be monogamous or not? And those are the things. And I hope that reading this book, you'll see that it's about so much more than that, and that a bi identity is a breakdown of a binary. It's an open-mindedness and a worldview. It's not just about sex and sexuality and gender. It's about reframing gender and reframing everything we're taught about sexuality. And so what I learned at Bi Request is that many bi people have done that work, and then they see the world differently. And that can be beautiful in a marriage, and it can also cause conflict in a marriage. And that's sort of what's in this book, is all the nuanced ways that this shows up. And so it's not, TV shows often boil it down to like, will they choose a man or a woman? Which one will they end up with in this love triangle? And like, that's like barely a issue that most people deal with. And there are so many other things. And so, yeah, that's what you'll read about. Okay, so I will stay on in a minute after I stop the recording, but I just want to say thank you all so much for coming here. I put up the links. You can buy the book. If you do like the book and could review it on Amazon, that would be incredible. And if you can help spread the word in any way, that's also amazing. The book makes a great gift. Maybe someone will come out to you and you didn't realize it. And I appreciate all your support. So thank you so much for being here. Yeah, this was amazing.